May 30th, 1862. After a month of struggling through the mud and dust of northeastern Mississippi, the vital rail junction of Corinth falls to the combined Union armies of Major General Henry W. Halleck. The capture of Corinth caps off almost 3 straight months of Union victories in the Western Theater. Once the junction is securely in Union hands, many on both sides wonder where this colossal force will go next. With this massive force, Halleck can easily take the important Confederate bastion on the Mississippi, Vicksburg, or finish off the demoralized and disease-ridden Confederate army at Tupelo. Yet, despite facing little resistance in the conquest of the vital rail junction, Halleck does the unthinkable and ends his conquest at the height of the campaigning season, grinding the federal momentum to a halt and allowing the distraught Southerners a chance to catch their breath. Halleck disperses his massive force of 110,000 men to defend their new gains in the region. Being second in command, Major General Ulysses S. Grant is given command of 2 armies, his own 38,000-man Army of the Tennessee and the Army of the Mississippi to defend West Tennessee. Major General John Pope, the aggressive commander who captured New Madrid, is called east by Lincoln to form a new army to face a growing threat from Lee. In the wake of Pope's departure, Major General William S. Rosecrans is given command of the 25,000-man Army of the Mississippi and takes over the defense of Corinth. Finally, Major General Don Carlos Buell and his 30,000-man Army of the Ohio is sent overland to capture the vital rail junction of Chattanooga on the Cumberland River in southeastern Tennessee, while the remaining troops are transferred to Arkansas to shore up that front. As Halleck disperses his massive federal army at Corinth, the remnants of the combined Confederate army at Tupelo are on the verge of collapse. Despite saving his army from destruction at Corinth, General P.G.T. Beauregard, the overall commander of Confederate forces in the Western Theater, abandons his men without authorization and heads to the spots in southern Alabama. Beauregard, who already has a strained relationship with President Davis for abandoning Corinth, infuriates the president further with his last act of insubordination. Furious, Davis promptly fires the Creole and replaces him with General Braxton Bragg as the new theater commander on June 20th. With Beauregard out of the picture, Bragg is left in command of 65,000 tired, sick, and demoralized men to contend with the 3 federal armies under Buell, Grant, and Rosecrans. Born on March 22, 1817, in Warrenton, North Carolina, General Braxton Bragg is a rising star in the Confederate Army after the death of General Albert Sidney Johnston at the Battle of Shiloh. With General Beauregard on the way out after his dismal career in the West, Davis needs a new man to step up and lead the Confederate forces to victory in the Western Theater. As a West Point graduate with experience fighting both the Seminoles and Mexicans, Bragg is the ideal man for the job. Yet, despite being the best man, Bragg suffers from mental and physical side effects from his traumatic childhood that impairs his decision-making abilities. As a result, Bragg has an acute lack of empathy and tends to blame others. These impairments will profoundly affect how Bragg commands his men as a senior-ranking officer in the Western Theater. Bragg knows he does not have enough men to succeed against the federal armies if they join forces to face him, the exact situation that happened against Johnston at the disastrous Battle of Shiloh 2 months prior. Knowing this, Bragg's course of action is to defeat the federal armies in detail. His hardest task is not fighting the battle itself, but deciding where to attack. As Buell's Army of the Ohio slowly marches towards Chattanooga, Grant and Rosecrans remain passive around Corinth, creating a golden opportunity for Bragg to take the offensive against the separating federal armies. Bragg's first option is to march north against the federal garrison at Corinth and retake the railroad junction. With Buell marching his army out of the picture, this certainly is a possibility. His second option is to chase after Buell as he slowly advances toward Chattanooga. However, this route will leave Grant free to move unimpeded towards Vicksburg, the last formidable Confederate stronghold on the Mississippi. The third option is for Bragg to swing his army around Buell and block his eastward advance using interior railroads. This will allow Bragg to link up with forces in eastern Tennessee, leveling the odds against Buell. If Bragg goes with his third option and defeats Buell, he may open up a direct route to Middle Tennessee and maybe even Kentucky. Yet, as Bragg considers each of his options, he lacks the self-confidence to choose a strategy to pursue. As Bragg ponders his next campaign, he slowly comes to favor a move towards Chattanooga and a strike north. There are a few factors that push Bragg into moving east. The first is Buell's slow progress towards Chattanooga due to the regional drought, which has reduced his advance to a crawl. The second factor is speed. Traveling by rail via Mobile and Atlanta will allow him to win the race to Chattanooga, thus enabling Bragg to block Buell from reaching the town. The third factor is the political and military benefits of striking into Kentucky, a fellow slave state. Many Kentuckians believe that their state has unwillingly joined the North and are eager for a pro-Confederate government to take over. Bragg has been told by prominent Kentuckians that thousands will join his ranks if he marches north into the bluegrass states, a luring proposition to build up his small army. The fourth and final factor that leads Bragg to eventually take his army into Kentucky is Major General Edmund Kirby Smith, a native Floridian in command of a small Confederate army in East Tennessee. East Tennessee is the poorest and most rugged part of the state. Even worse, the region is pro-Union, forcing Smith to contend with a highly disloyal population that has been constantly sending the North new recruits. Dissatisfied with his assignment in the rebellious backcountry, Smith sees glory to be gained by invading Kentucky. With news of the approach of Buell's army from the west, Smith sees this as an opportunity to receive some reinforcements from Bragg for his prospective campaign. Smith promises Bragg if he comes to his aid, he will assist him in his invasion into Middle Tennessee and possibly even Kentucky. With these words whispering in his ears, Bragg's course of action is all but decided. To prepare his army to move east, Bragg reorganizes a 33,000-man army of Mississippi into two roughly equal wings. Major General William J. Hardee is given command of the left wing, while Major General Leonidas Polk takes command of the right wing. In Bragg's eyes, Hardee has shown great leadership at the Battle of Shiloh and deserves his position. Yet, unlike Hardee, the less capable Polk is a political appointee due to being a favorite friend of President Davis. Due to this arrangement, Bragg will find it hard to work with this political general who he deems incompetent. On June 26, Bragg sends McCown's division of 3,000 men east to reinforce Smith. Then he sends Confederate raiders under Colonel Forrest to impede Buell's advance, which in conjunction with the drought proves to be a huge success. To protect the vital stronghold of Vicksburg on the Mississippi River, Bragg orders Major General Earl Van Dorn with 16,000 men to defend the fortress city. While in Tupelo, he leaves Major General Sterling Price in command of another 16,000 men, with instructions to prevent either Grant or Rosecrans from assisting Buell as he moves towards Chattanooga. As Bragg's army in Mississippi prepares for its move towards Chattanooga, other Confederate forces are on the move as well. On July 4th, with encouragement from General Smith, Colonel John Hunt Morgan, in command of 900 men, rides north into the Bluegrass State. For the next 3 weeks, Morgan sweeps through Kentucky, capturing 12,000 Federals, acquiring hundreds of horses, destroying massive quantities of supplies, and distracting thousands of Federal troops from being sent to the front. When Morgan returns from a successful raid in Kentucky, he is hailed as Jeb Stuart of the West. Not only is Morgan's raid extremely successful, but it also inspires a revolt against the federal-controlled state government in Frankfort. Morgan reports to Smith that, if the whole country can be secured, 25,000 to 30,000 men will join you at once. With all these dazzling reports coming from the Bluegrass State, Kirby Smith's mind wanders north. On July 23rd, once all is prepared, Bragg begins his 776-mile journey to Chattanooga via Mobile and Atlanta. This circuitous route is a memorable time for the soldiers in Bragg's army, as it received cheers from local citizens while passing from town to town. For the next 2 weeks, the train route incredibly moves 30,000 infantry from Montgomery, Alabama to Chattanooga, Tennessee, successfully beating Buell to the railroad junction, a feat many will remember for the rest of their lives. On July 31st, Bragg meets with Smith in Chattanooga, completing his momentous journey from Tupelo. Once the pleasantries are over, the two work late into the night planning their campaign into Middle Tennessee. The plan calls for the combined forces of Bragg and Smith to march north, and seize the Cumberland Gap from Union Brigadier General George W. Morgan's division. Once the gap is cleared, the entire force will sweep into Middle Tennessee and destroy Buell's Army of the Ohio in northern Alabama. Once Buell is defeated, the Confederate forces will strike north into Kentucky. In the likely chance that Grant sends reinforcements to Buell, Price and Van Dorn are ordered to strike the Federals stationed in northern Mississippi. However, their plan is fraught with risk. Movements on a large scale such as this by armies separated by hundreds of miles require precise cooperation and perfect timing, which rarely happens. Anything that deviates from the plan can derail the entire campaign. Due to the confusing system of departments set up in the Confederacy, Bragg and Smith are considered equals, even though Bragg is the senior ranking officer. Neither officer has the authority to issue orders to the other if they are separated. Once they join forces, Smith will come under Bragg's command. Unsure about how well this relationship will work, Bragg confides with his friend, President Davis, about the situation. In the correspondence, Davis gives Bragg a false sense of friendly cooperation between him and Smith, further exacerbating his uncertainty about his role in the upcoming campaign. Just as Smith returns to his headquarters in Knoxville, he goes against the agreement with Bragg and plans his own invasion of Kentucky instead, thinking a lone invasion of the Bluegrass State would bring him more glory. To further his plans, Smith requests and receives more men, especially from Bragg's veterans, for a fake operation against the Cumberland Gap. On August 9th, once the veteran brigades of Smith and Cleburne arrive, Smith writes to Bragg telling him that he's breaking their agreement and is bypassing the gap, heading straight for the heart of Kentucky instead, regardless of what Buell does. Lacking the authority to countermand Smith and unable to confront Buell alone, Bragg can do little besides go along with Smith's new plan of invading Kentucky. After convincing himself of the merits, Bragg writes passively to Smith telling him he will support his move. Due to his indecisiveness, Bragg has let a junior officer strong-arm him into invading Kentucky against his better judgment, a precedent that might spell a disaster for the Confederates in the upcoming campaign. With Bragg's meek approval of the plan, Smith writes to President Davis to get authorization for the invasion of Kentucky, stating, "Politically, now is the time to strike at Kentucky. Delay loses a golden opportunity, and fall finds your people powerless and a large army between us and the waters of the Ohio." While Smith is scheming behind Bragg's back, the latter orders Price and Van Dorn to work in unison with his force by threatening West Tennessee. However, Bragg allows both generals to work independently of each other until they join forces, a relationship that proves uncooperative, the same dilemma he himself is in. By August 11th, Smith is ready to launch his campaign, but Bragg's tired veterans are not. Bragg asks Smith to wait a few more weeks, but to no avail. Smith is moving north with or without Bragg. On the night of August 13th, with 21,000 men divided into 4 divisions, Smith's Army of Kentucky leaves its base at Knoxville to begin his long-anticipated invasion of Kentucky. The morale among his men rises as they march north. As they march, they start singing hymns, viewing themselves as missionaries to liberate Kentucky for God and the Confederacy. While Bragg is continuing to prepare his men for the invasion of Kentucky, Smith is marching straight for Lexington, the heart of the Bluegrass State. Because General Morgan is entrenched in the Cumberland Gap, Smith leads only a holding force while he continues his advance north. On August 29th, as the energized Confederates march forward, they unexpectedly find half of the Union Army of Kentucky under Major General William Nelson blocking their path at Richmond. The next day, Cleburne's veterans attack and swiftly rout the Green Union defenders from the field, wounding General Nelson in the process. As the Federals flee, they discover their path blocked by Churchill's division moving upon their rear. Unable to escape, the Federal soldiers surrender. When it is all over, the Confederates capture over 4,000 Federals, making the Battle of Richmond one of the most lopsided Confederate victories at this point in the war. With the destruction of Nelson's force at Richmond, the road to Lexington is clear. On September 2nd, butternut soldiers march through the town and are greeted by cheers from the populace. A Tennessean in Preston Smith's brigade recalled that the balconies, housetops, and windows, in fact every place available for view, was filled with people cheering and waving handkerchiefs. Unable to stop Smith from reaching Lexington, the remaining Federal forces retreat across the Ohio River to Cincinnati, leaving only Louisville as the sole Union bastion in Kentucky. With the possibility of the Confederates reaching the Ohio River, thousands of volunteers from across the North rallied to defend their states. With the capture of Lexington in the majority of the state, Smith feels like a warrior from the Old Testament declaring, "God's hand has directed me in this movement." But as Smith feels the glory of conquering Kentucky, the realization of the situation dawns upon him. He has no concrete plan on what to do next after capturing Lexington and is unsure of his next move. He realizes that he is isolated deep in Union territory without any immediate assistance. Reports arrive about Federal forces concentrated in Louisville and Cincinnati, along with rumors that Grant's Shiloh veterans are among them. As his anxiety takes over, Smith goes on the defensive and desperately writes to Bragg to save him in his time of need, just as he did before in East Tennessee. Meanwhile, in Stevenson, Alabama, after receiving news that Bragg's army has beaten him to Chattanooga, Buell decides to end his half-hearted attempt of taking the railroad junction. On August 20th, Buell orders his army back to Nashville to protect the supply base. With reports of Bragg's army on the verge of moving from Chattanooga, Buell can only speculate on his ultimate destination. To Buell, Bragg has only two options, either heading west towards Nashville to retake the state capital from the Federals, or march north and link up with Smith in Lexington. Yet, until Bragg reveals his hand, Buell will be forced to wait in Nashville. On August 28th, with the Army of Mississippi finally in an operational state, Bragg orders his army to move out. With the Cumberland Gap still under Union control, Bragg angles his march north towards Glasgow, Kentucky, narrowly avoiding Buell, who's trying to lay a trap in the gaps near McMinnville, Tennessee. Upon learning of Bragg's advance, Buell orders his men to march after the Confederate army, hoping to catch them while they are strung out on the roads leading north. With Buell rapidly marching upon his rear, Bragg pushes his men hard, reaching Glasgow on September 7th. Once in Glasgow, Bragg wants to march straight north to link up with Smith, but his path is blocked. Standing between Bragg and Smith is a small garrison of 1,800 men under Colonel John T. Wilder at Munfordville, guarding the vital Louisville and Nashville Railroad bridge across the Green River. On September 14th, after receiving a tip from some of Smith's cavalry, Brigadier General James Chalmers marches north without orders from Bragg and attacks the fort, being easily repulsed. That night, after receiving the news of the fight, Bragg reacts with unrelenting anger. Not only did Chalmers get repulsed after an unauthorized attack, but now Buell is just to the west in Bowling Green. It is now a race against time to see which army reaches Smith first, Buell or Bragg. Even though Buell could have marched around Munfordville, the general refuses to leave the Federal garrison in his rear. Instead, he pushes his entire army to deal with this pesky Union force. Once he reaches Munfordville, the Confederate army surrounds Wilder's garrison. Wilder, who is new to command, is unsure how to respond to Bragg's army. Luckily, an unsuspecting friend comes to his assistance. Under a flag of truce, Major General Simon B. Buckner shows his federal friend the Confederate forces and convinces him to surrender, which he does on September 17th. With the surrender of Munfordville, Bragg captures 4,000 men, a vast quantity of war materials, and supplies his men desperately need. With the annoying garrison out of the way, Bragg now has some time to decide how to approach this new phase of the campaign, as he stands between Buell and Louisville. As Buell's army is filing into Bowling Green on September 14th, they learn that Bragg has not dallied at Glasgow, but moved north to besiege the Munfordville garrison. With Bragg's small army in his sights and preoccupied with their siege, the Confederates are vulnerable to being attacked in the rear. Yet, Buell waits 2 days before moving forward to give battle. As the Federals advance, they come upon Wilder's paroled men, who report the Confederates are ready to receive them. With this news, Buell halts his advance and refuses to fight until he receives reinforcements, ordering Thomas, who is currently in Nashville, to link up with his forces in southern Kentucky. With the capture of Munfordville, Bragg has the opportunity to force Buell to battle or march upon Louisville. At Munfordville, the Army of Mississippi holds the Louisville Pike, which means that Buell has to either contend with the Confederates or take a circuitous route to reach Kentucky's prominent city. Meanwhile, chaos reigns supreme in Louisville. With only a few brigades of raw troops to defend the key city, the Federals expect Bragg's ragged veterans to easily take the town. Considering his situation, Bragg deduces that Buell would take the circuitous route to reach Louisville. With this in mind, he concludes that he has time to link up with Smith and then march on the river town before Buell arrives. In the end, however, Bragg lingers in Munfordville for 3 days, losing his best chance to take the city. On September 20th, the disappointing Confederates marched north to Bardstown, giving Buell, who has not moved yet, a clear path north, letting the civilians of the important town breathe a sigh of relief. In the Army of the Ohio, the soldiers are furious at Buell's indecisiveness. To them, the general has not only let Bragg and Smith invade their homes, but now he refuses to fight them. Coupled with the defeat at Munfordville, they're disgusted with their commander. Buell, on the contrary, has no desire to fight until reinforcements join him, as he worries that the Confederates outnumber him. With this on his mind, Buell pushes his tired and ragged soldiers to the safety of Louisville, reaching the town on September 25th. Once the exhausted men of Buell's army arrive, they disperse to find what food they can eat. While the soldiers revel in their precious time off, Buell begins a heated political battle to keep his position as the commander of the Army of the Ohio, forcing everybody, from private to general, to take a side. Amid the chaos engulfing Louisville, an unexpected disaster shakes the entire Federal High Command in Kentucky. As the Confederates move north, Indiana-born Brigadier General Jefferson C. Davis is sent to work with Kentuckian General Nelson, who is a Buell supporter, to organize the defense of Louisville. The two start to argue and trash each other's state in public. On the 25th, emotions come to a head. Tired of Davis's antics, Nelson issues a warrant for Davis's arrest. Taken aback by the warrant, Davis travels to Louisville to confront Nelson in person and finds him in the gatehouse on September 29th. The two generals get into a heated argument until Davis loses his temper and shoots Nelson in the chest, who dies within the hour. As word spreads of Nelson's death, the army almost unilaterally praises Davis for the assassination. Despite the murder, Davis is never convicted for the killing due to the crisis facing Kentucky. However, Buell's biggest threat to his position comes from Washington, D.C. Due to his bad performance and attitude in the past few weeks, Lincoln is on the verge of removing him. With the midterms coming up, the radical Republicans in Lincoln's administration want to remove all Democrat generals in command, such as McClellan and Buell, who have shown a lack of motivation in persecuting the South, and replace them with more energetic Republican generals. Therefore, on September 29th, Buell receives the orders relieving him as the commander of the Army of the Ohio on the same day as Nelson's assassination. In his place, Halleck chooses Major General George H. Thomas to become the new commander. Yet, in the height of the crisis facing Kentucky, Thomas is unwilling to accept the promotion, stating, "General Buell's preparations have been completed to move against the enemy, and I therefore respectfully ask he may be retained in the command." Unable to convince Thomas to take over, Halleck agrees and suspends the orders relieving Buell until the crisis is averted. Due to the mayhem that has reigned on September 29th, Buell will keep his command until the crisis afflicting Kentucky is over. While everything else is going on in Louisville, the last of Buell's reinforcements finally arrive in the city. But with Nelson's death, Buell's forced to reorganize his army. Due to almost being replaced, Buell places Thomas as second in command of the army and works closely with him the coming days. The commanding general parcels out his 25 brigades among 3 corps. For the 13,000-man 1st Corps, Buell selects Major General Alexander McCook. Alexander is a member of the Fighting McCooks and is a competent officer who can be counted upon, even though he preferred Thomas as the army commander. Major General Thomas Crittenden is chosen for the 20,000-man 2nd Corps, another competent officer who showed talent at Shiloh. Even though McCook and Crittenden are easy choices, the commander of the 3rd Corps is not. Buell intended for Nelson to be the 3rd Corps commander. However, since he recently died, there are not many decent options left. Buell ultimately taps Major General Charles Gilbert to lead the 22,000-man 3rd Corps. With his army ready for battle, Buell plans his advance against Bragg and Smith. On October 1st, Buell plans for 2 divisions under Brigadier General Joshua W. Sill to demonstrate against Frankfort, where Smith's army is reported to be. While Sill's demonstration is being executed, the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Corps will march on separate roads toward Bragg's reported location at Bardstown. With Smith and Bragg distracted with Sill further north, the Confederates will not expect a federal advance from the west, a simple plan that Buell hopes will crush the rebel invaders. While Buell reorganizes his army, the Confederates rest in Bardstown. Despite the success his army has achieved, Bragg could not help but feel dispirited. Bragg hoped that once he arrived in Kentucky, the Kentuckians would swell his ranks to offset the Federals' numerical advantage. Only a few actually joined his ranks, and those who did deserted soon after. Even if Smith links up with his army, Bragg will still not have enough men to face the reinforced Federal army. With no recruits forthcoming and Smith being reluctant to join him, Bragg is now considering abandoning the campaign altogether and returning to Tennessee. Just as Bragg is on the verge of leaving, Richard Hawes, the provisional governor of Kentucky, arrives from Richmond. Hawes' arrival gives Bragg an idea. If he can formally install him in Frankfort, the governor can issue a conscription bill for the state to force reluctant Kentuckians to join him. With his plans set on September 28th, Bragg and Hawes rides with an escort first to Smith in Lexington and then to the capital at Frankfort, leaving Polk in command of the army. On his way to Smith, Bragg passes through the small town of Perryville, which is reported to have a good supply of water during the extreme drought facing the region. As Bragg rides towards Smith, the general orders Polk to move the army north close to the Smith in Lexington so the 2 armies can link up. On October 1st, Bragg and Smith meet once again, the first time since their last meeting in Chattanooga back in August. Despite the momentary fallout after Chattanooga, the 2 generals are happy to see each other once again. Now that the 2 generals are together, Bragg takes over the command of both armies. With Smith finally under his thumb and Hawes in Frankfort to assert Confederate control of Kentucky, it seems like nothing can stop Bragg from retaking the initiative. Yet, as both the Union and Confederate armies gear up to make their moves in northern Kentucky, reports start filtering back about Major General Earl Van Dorn marching north into Tennessee, seemingly bypassing the vital rail junction of Corinth, Mississippi. Fall 1862. Confederate armies are on the move all across the nation. In the east, General Robert E. Lee and his army in Northern Virginia presses north into Maryland after the federal debacle at Second Manassas, hoping to strip the border state out of Union hands to isolate Washington, D.C. In the west, Generals Braxton Bragg and Edmund Kirby Smith marched north through the Cumberland Gap and invade Kentucky, looking to destroy Don Carlos Buell's Army of the Ohio and claim the Bluegrass State for the Confederacy. In Mississippi, Generals Sterling Price and Earl Van Dorn planned a joint operation into West Tennessee, hoping to reclaim lost territory after the fall of Corinth. And finally, in the Trans-Mississippi Theater, Major General Thomas Heineman is gathering a force to challenge Union control over the Ozarks. With all these Confederate armies on the move, it is no wonder that Grant has called this period the darkest days of the war. Despite all the simultaneous invasions of the North, the most pressing for Major General Ulysses S. Grant is the dual threat to West Tennessee. These are the twin Confederate armies of Major General Earl Van Dorn's 16,000-strong Vicksburg garrison and Major General Sterling Price's 16,000-strong Army of the West. With Bragg taking the Army of Mississippi east of Block Buell's march to Chattanooga, the new theater commander orders these two armies to keep Grant distracted and docile in Mississippi. Though both armies have been assigned the same task, they are independent of the other, and as long as they remain separated, neither has authority over the other. Not only that, these two commanders chosen for this operation couldn't be more opposed to cooperating. Van Dorn, despite being a friend of President Davis, is despised by both his men and the other ranking officers in the Confederate Army after his disastrous defeat at Pea Ridge. Price, on the other hand, is the polar opposite. He's a man loved by his troops and is easy to work with, even though he has a burning desire to return to his adopted state of Missouri. If these two armies ever link up, Van Dorn, being the senior ranking general, would take command of both forces. With Grant's forces scattered along a defensive front in northern Mississippi, a combined Confederate army might be able to easily isolate and destroy the various federal garrisons in detail, a luring proposition. In the end, Confederate fortunes in Mississippi depend on these two conflicting personalities to put aside their differences and work together. Facing this Confederate threat in Mississippi are the federal armies left by Major General Henry W. Halleck after the dissolution of his massive force at the beginning of June. Grant, being the senior ranking general after Halleck, is given command of the two armies left in the region. This force consists of his own Army of the Tennessee and Rosecrans' Army of the Mississippi, with a combined total of 63,000 men. Major General William S. Rosecrans, second in command behind Grant, is a rising star in the Union Army. Being part of the brilliant West Point class of 1842, the same class as Earl Van Dorn, Rosecrans is a man of rare ability, who strives for excellence. For all his talents, Rosecrans felt unappreciated while serving McClellan in his 1861 conquest of West Virginia. Chafed by the lack of recognition, he secured an assignment to Pope's Army of the Mississippi during the March on Corinth. Even with all his amazing abilities, Rosecrans has a knack for irritating superiors, something Grant will soon be all too familiar with. Despite outnumbering the scattered Confederate armies in Mississippi over 2-1, Grant is hamstrung in his position. Due to being left by Halleck to consolidate their previous gains, a major drought afflicting the region, and disease incapacitating thousands of men, the Federals are forced to remain on the defensive for the near future. To utilize his time, Rosecrans starts building up his defenses around Corinth, adding 5 earthen nets on the high ground within half a mile of the rail intersection. But with no alarming threat and unable to move, the Federals slip into a state of laziness in their positions around Corinth, letting their readiness fall into ruin. By late August, the stalemate that has reigned over the summer months of 1862 is coming to an end. With only Price remaining in northern Mississippi to threaten the federal garrisons, and Van Dorn being lured away by the prospects of recapturing Baton Rouge, Grant orders Rosecrans to send 2 divisions north to help Buell deal with Bragg's northward push into Tennessee. On September 1st, Price receives orders from Bragg to prevent Rosecrans from joining Buell. Knowing that he cannot attack Rosecrans alone, Price calls on Van Dorn for support. The Mississippian, however, has no intention to support Bragg and is more interested in recovering West Tennessee. Instead, Van Dorn urges Price to link up with him to maneuver Rosecrans out of Corinth, which he deems too costly to take by force. Hearing of Van Dorn's plan, Price is incredulous. He has his orders to harass the Union rear, and Van Dorn is daydreaming about pushing the Federals out of Mississippi. On September 7th, unable to dally any longer, Price notifies Van Dorn that "I am moving immediately against Iuka in accordance with orders just received from General Bragg, who again instructs me to follow Rosecrans." Hoping that Van Dorn will come to his aid, Price waits another 4 days before starting north. Finally, on September 11th, Price advances a small army to intercept Rosecrans, which he suspects of passing through the small Mississippi town of Iuka. As the men under Old Pap march north, onlookers in each town witness a rarity in the war. A camel named Old Douglas is seen among the ranks of the 43rd Mississippi carrying the officer's baggage. Not being native to the continent, Douglas will be the only camel people might ever see. After a few days of marching through the sweltering heat of northern Mississippi, the Confederates near the small federal depot of Iuka, just east of Corinth. On September 14th, Price's Confederates rush the town and capture the depot before the departing Federals can destroy it. The capture of Iuka is a boon for Price's near-destitute men as they find thousands of pounds of much-needed supplies. While Price is out conquering Iuka, Van Dorn has been in correspondence with Davis about getting sole command of all troops in Mississippi. Once he is given Price's army, Van Dorn starts planning his own offensive against the Federals. Van Dorn wants to take Memphis, but knows if Grant still controls Corinth, he will not be able to get close. Therefore, to take Memphis, Van Dorn needs to push the Federals out of Corinth. With the chain of command now in place, Van Dorn orders Price to link up with him west of Corinth. When Price gets the order from Van Dorn, he readies his force to march at daylight the next day. Meanwhile, Grant does not intend to allow the Confederates to march unimpeded around Mississippi. As long as Price and Van Dorn remain separated, they will remain a minor threat, and Grant wants to keep it that way. On September 17th, Grant and his subordinate Rosecrans formulate a plan to trap the elusive Missourian. The two generals agree on a pincer movement that will envelop the Confederates. The plan calls for Major General Edward Ord to hit Iuka from the northwest, while Rosecrans swings around and attacks Price from the south. If successful, Price will be cornered and his entire command either captured or destroyed. On September 18th, Ord steps off towards Iuka. Because he has a more direct path, Ord arrives later that day. Rosecrans, on the other hand, waits until the 19th and march towards Iuka. In Iuka, Price is about to contend with Ord when he gets word of Rosecrans' approach from the south. Reacting quickly, he turns to face this new threat. The two sides battle it out until darkness ends the fighting. Despite the surprise, Price is able to hold the field, even with the death of Brigadier General Lewis H. Little, who considers his right-hand man. Realizing that his army is caught in a pincer, Price pulls out of Iuka that night on the Fulton Road, which is luckily left unguarded, and heads south to link up with Van Dorn. The next morning, the Federals find the town empty of Confederates except for the dead and dying. Just as they thought they are done with the rebel problem, Grant immediately drives everybody back to Corinth in case Van Dorn attacks while the town is left undefended. Though they are unable to capture or destroy Price at Iuka, they have dealt the Missourian a blow and are back ready to defend the vital crossroads from any possible attack. Price's army, tired and demoralized from their adventure at Iuka, finally joins forces with Van Dorn at Ripley on September 28th. The startling fight confirms his suspicions that only through cooperation with Van Dorn will they be able to overcome Grant and Rosecrans of Mississippi. Once the two forces merge, Van Dorn names this new force the Army of West Tennessee, which consists of 3 divisions, 2 under Price and 1 under his own command. Price's corps contains 15,000 men split between two divisions led by Brigadier General Louis Hebert and Brigadier General Dabney H. Maury. The remaining 7,000 men make up Van Dorn's sole division, under the command of Major General Mansfield Lovell. Despite Price and his men having just fought a battle, Van Dorn wants to make an immediate drive against Corinth before the Federals can concentrate. Now with a combined force of 22,000 men, the Confederates hold a numerical edge that will let them easily defeat the various Federal outposts that guard the Memphis and Charleston Railroad. To swiftly take the town, Van Dorn plans to march his men north to Pocahontas, cutting out the Federal supply line just north of the state line, pivot to the east, and then descend upon Corinth from the northwest. From this direction, he will be able to avoid most of the earthworks his men built to face Halleck's gigantic army back in May. If all goes to plan, when Corinth is taken, Grant and Rosecrans will be forced to abandon Mississippi, reversing all the losses that were sustained back in the spring. When Earl Van Dorn reveals his plan to his officers, they are surprised. Brigadier General Dabney Maury, one of Price's division commanders, favors the plan wholeheartedly. However, both Price and Lovell oppose the plan. They see attacking the very fortifications their men built to be suicide, and would prefer another, less bloody method to remove the Federals from Corinth. Regardless of the objections, Van Dorn is not altering his plans. The Confederates will attack Corinth. On September 29th, the Confederates march north from their camps in Ripley. Many hope they are marching north to support Bragg in Kentucky, yet, just as they're getting their hopes up, the army veers to the southeast, heading towards Chewalla. When the Confederates arrive on October 2nd, the division commanders brief their subordinates on the plan to attack Corinth. Many are shocked and some are physically upset. The man who threw caution to the wind at Pea Ridge is once again leading them into battle, this time against an entrenched foe. Meanwhile, when Rosecrans receives reports of Van Dorn and Price linking up, he becomes concerned that Corinth will soon be their target. Currently, he only has a division of Brigadier General Thomas J. McKean, around 5,000 men, that garrison the entrenchments. If the rebels do intend to attack Corinth, it is imperative that he pulls in all his forces to face this threat. While he waits for more reports to filter in before he acts, Rosecrans puts McKean's men to work strengthening their position. When news arrives that Van Dorn is marching his way, Rosecrans immediately orders the scattered divisions to rally upon the town. He also sends a report to Grant, who rallies Ord's division to hurry to his aid. But being over 40 miles away in Bolivar, it will take Ord a few days before he can reach Corinth. With 23,000 men and 4 divisions positioned in and around Corinth, it will be a matter of time before each one arrives. Brigadier General Charles S. Hamilton, with 6,000 men, will leave his position at daybreak on October 3rd for a 5-mile march to Corinth. Brigadier General Thomas A. Davies, in command of 2,900 men, waits until 7 a.m. to start his 6-mile march to the town. Being the furthest from Corinth, Brigadier General David S. Stanley and his 7,000 men get up before dawn to begin their 6-hour trek. Finally, McKean, who is already in Corinth, sends a portion of his division up the Chewalla Road this time of the approaching rebels. For Rosecrans, it is a race against time to see who will reach Corinth first. When dawn appears on Friday, October 3rd, 1862, all that stands between Van Dorn and the lost crossroads of the Confederacy is McKean's lone division. Though Rosecrans correctly guessed the Confederates would pass the night at Chewalla, they started earlier than expected for their final leg to Corinth. Impelled by fear of Grant arriving with reinforcements, Van Dorn fiercely drives his army on their 9-mile march to Corinth, intending to attack as soon as he arrives. Leading the army towards Corinth is Villapig's brigade of Mississippians in Lovell's division. As the Confederates come within 3 miles of Corinth, the first shots of the battle are fired at 7 a.m. by Villapig's men, who push Oliver's outnumbered Wisconsinites back towards the town. With the Federal skirmishers forced back to the earthworks, Van Dorn orders up the entire army of West Tennessee to form a battle line arching around the northwestern corner of Corinth. While the Confederates shake out their lines into a coherent formation, the Federal artillery opens up upon the rebel infantry, who can do little but weather the rain of shot and shell. Lovell, who is leading the column, forms the army's right flank upon the north side of the Memphis and Charleston Railroad. Hebert, leading Price's corps, anchors his left upon the Mobile and Ohio Railroad. Finally, Maury, who is bringing up the rear of the army, forms his line in the center, filling the gap between Lovell and Hebert. Due to this arrangement, Van Dorn is not planning for a general reserve, which means no troops will be available to support an attack if there is a breakthrough. Facing these already demoralized Confederates is a belt of fallen timber laid upon uneven ground, backed up by earthworks and artillery, a terrifying sight for any Civil War soldier. As the Confederates form their lines, the artillery fire is not the only thing afflicting the Southern ranks. The temperature, just like the sun, is climbing higher by the minute. By the time the temperature reaches its peak, it will hover around 90 degrees, which causes hundreds of men on both sides to fall out of the ranks due to the heat. By 10 a.m., the Confederate army has completed its deployment and is ready to advance. With his ranks ready, Van Dorn orders an echelon attack from the right to the left, starting with Lovell's division. Van Dorn knows that the entrenchments do not extend to Lovell's front, which will make his initial assault easier. Thus, once a breakthrough is secure, each successive assault will see more success. However, despite hearing Van Dorn preach speed for days, Lovell dallies at the point of attack, just in time for the majority of Rosecrans' troops to fall into position. As each division reaches Corinth, Rosecrans wastes no time garrisoning the outer entrenchments to face off against Van Dorn's assault columns. On the far left, facing Lovell's eventual onslaught, is McKean's division of Western troops, who's anchoring his left on the Memphis and Charleston Railroad. On McKean's right are the arriving troops of Davies' division of Shiloh veterans, who fill the gap between McKean and the Mobile and Ohio Railroad. On the right side of the railroad is the recent arrivals of Hamilton's 2 brigades, protecting Davies' right. Finally, Rosecrans orders Stanley to form up his division south of Corinth when they arrive later that day to be the Army's reserve. All told, by 10 a.m., Rosecrans has thrown every man present on the front line, just in time to face Van Dorn's Confederates. Knowing that his men will be unlikely to hold the Confederates on the outer, weaker earthworks, Van Dorn has stressed to his officers to delay the Confederates for as long as possible, bloodying them as they attack, and only fall back in the face of overwhelming odds, slowly drawing the Confederates closer to the town and his recently constructed lunettes that surround the rail junction, where he plans to break the Confederate attack. A similar strategy that Grant employed at Shiloh, trading space for time. By 11 a.m., unable to wait any longer, Lovell proceeds with the attack, sending his brigades one after another towards the Federal earthworks. Starting the attack is Rust's brigade on the far right. Once Rust's men leave the protection of the trees, they are shredded by MacArthur's Wisconsinites. Rust reported after the battle that it appeared that the entire line would be swept away. Even with the ghastly holes being made in their lines, the Confederates close up and push on. Following in their wake are the other 2 brigades in Lovell's division, Bowen and Villapig, each applying their own pressure against the Federal line. Wanting to make sure Lovell is successful, Van Dorn orders a brigade from Maury's division to support the attack. To support Lovell, Maury sends Moore's brigade of Trans-Mississippi troops to his sector. Seeing a gap between McKean and Davies, the hot-headed Texan directs his men straight for the opening. Racing through the abattis, these Westerners make quick work of the Federal defenders, allowing them to crack McKean's position. Unable to withstand this assault from either the front or the flank, McKean pulls his line back and reforms in Battery F. Moore falls in the wake of the retreating Federals, ransacking their camps as they go. Lovell, on the other hand, is unsure of what to do next after taking the earthworks, allowing a momentary lull to consume the area. Meanwhile, further east, Price's sector is heating up as he gets his 2 divisions into the fight. Leading off his attack is Pfeiffer's Brigade of Texas and Arkansas Dismounted Cavalry. Watching these assault columns advance, Davies knows it is only a matter of time before his outnumbered division is pushed back. First striking his left, Pfeiffer's men begin shredding Ogilby's ranks. Following Pfeiffer's path, Gates' Missourians join in and apply their own weight to the fight. Nevertheless, Oglesby's Shiloh veterans are able to hold their own only until Martin's brigade of Mississippians arrive to strike their right flank. Under pressure from 3 different brigades, Ogilby's veterans finally break, leaving Hackelman's Iowans alone to contend with the Confederates. After witnessing Ogilby's rout, Davies pulls his battered division back 1,000 yards to reform at 1 p.m. Hackelman holds only momentarily to fire off a few volleys into Greene's advancing Missourians before falling back. All along the front, the worn-out Confederates cheer about their success in their assault against the Union fortifications, capturing many prisoners and guns. However, their success has cost them dearly. Many officers and men have been mowed down by Federal guns, including 32-year-old Colonel John D. Martin. During the fight, he was hit in the shoulder by a Manet ball while leading his brigade, a wound that proved to be mortal. For now, the tired rebels rest and reform their lines for the next phase of the battle. With the outer entrenchments captured, many in the rebel army thought the hardest part of the battle was over. Yet, unbeknownst to almost everybody in the Confederate army, Rosecrans has another, stronger layer of earthworks, crowned with redoubts, just waiting for the Confederates to advance. Despite cracking Davies and McKean's forward position, the Confederates have only dealt a blow to a portion of Rosecrans' entire force. Hamilton's division, which is in the trees across the Mobile and Ohio Railroad, has not seen any fighting yet, and still holds his position on the outer earthworks, while Stanley, who's finally arriving in Corinth, is forming up his division just south of the town. As a momentary lull consumes the front, Rosecrans senses an opportunity to strike Price with a decisive blow. Knowing that Hamilton's division is not engaged, Rosecrans orders the New Yorker to face his entire division west and flank the advancing Confederates. As his orders arrive, Hamilton is confused about Rosecrans' intentions and stays put until he receives a clarification. Meanwhile, in the center, Moore continues his lone drive against the retreating Federals. Raising the rebel yell, Moore's brigade assaults Battery F and their supporting infantry, Crocker's Iowan brigade. These 2 brigades fight until Lovell finally moves up, which forces Crocker to give up his tenuous hold at the redoubt. At 3 p.m., Price moves up his corps to continue the battle, but as they form up, confusion in the ranks prevent them from utilizing their local superiority in numbers. Instead of engaging a new Federal line with 4 brigades, only Greene's brigade of Missourians will attack. Once again, even with Van Dorn present on the scene, his lack of leadership squanders the momentum. Covered by artillery, Greene drives his brigade out of the woods and against the new Federal line formed by Davies' men at a building called the White House. As his Missourians get into the open, they are raked by short-range canister blasts from an array of artillery batteries, which tear great holes in the rebel lines. Even with this hail of lead, Greene refuses to give up and continues his advance. Realizing that a single brigade will not be able to break this new line, Price orders up Pfeiffer's brigade to help Greene's Missourians. With no infantry support facing Pfeiffer, the Union artillery falls back to replenish their ammunition, forcing Davies to contend with the Confederates alone. Knowing that his men cannot hold without artillery, and retreat is not an option, the only thing Davies can do now is attack. Once Oglesby and Hackelman are ready, Davies gives the order to charge. Both brigades fire a volley and charge the Confederates. As his men bound forward, Davies witnesses the action. The enemy was forced back at the point of the bayonets with great slaughter across the open field. At this point, after being shredded by both rifle and artillery fire, Greene cannot stand against this unexpected onslaught. Greene's Missourians fall back across the very ground that paid dearly to cross. Knowing that Davies' men are at their breaking point, Rosecrans calls for support from Stanley's unused division. Once he receives Rosecrans' order, Stanley dispatches Mower's brigade of Westerners to the front. At 5 p.m., with light starting to dim, Mower's men reach the front just as Davies' men pull back, allowing these fresh troops to take on the rebels. Amid the fight between Mower and Greene, an almost surreal event occurs. As the 8th Wisconsin rushes into battle, they bring their famous mascot to the front, an eagle named Old Abe, who is well known on both sides. Once the Confederates see the eagle, the officers order their men to shoot the bird. As bullets begin to fly around Old Abe, his leash is hit, letting him fly from his keeper, as the 8th watches in absolute horror. For a time, both sides stop firing to watch the eagle soar above the lines. Thankfully, Old Abe soon takes refuge behind his bear and hides from the fight. Refusing to return to his perch, the bear brings Old Abe back to camp. Despite being the target of hundreds of men, Old Abe luckily escapes the battle with only some clipped feathers. In the midst of the fight, both of Davies' brigadiers are hit, Oglesby with a wound to the chest and Hackelman with a slit throat. Of the two, the latter proved to be mortal. Seeing the Union lines start to crumble, Price plans for another assault to break into the town. But as his column advances, it is battered by the defenders, similar to Greene's treatment earlier, and pulls back. When darkness finally covers the area, the Federals are able to disengage and fall back to the last line. Despite holding off the Confederates from the town, the air surrounding the Union lines is demoralizing. They have fallen back 2 miles, suffered numerous dead and captured, and many are on their last legs both mentally and physically. Nonetheless, many try to get what sleep they can, knowing full well the Confederates will continue their attack in the morning. Across the lines, the atmosphere is completely different. Sensing victory is just around the corner, Van Dorn was to press forward with another assault. However, with reports of an entire Federal division on his left, exhaustion crippling his ranks, and light failing, Van Dorn is persuaded by Price to stop for the day. Though Van Dorn's men did not capture Corinth on October 3rd, he is quite happy with the results. He has breached Rosecrans' defenses, enacted considerable damage upon the ranks, and is poised to capture the town. Thus, the only thing remaining for the Confederates to do now is to get some sleep, and be ready to march into Corinth as conquerors in the morning. Exuberant at their imminent victory, the Confederate batteries open up early, breaking the ominous silence at 4 a.m. on Saturday, October 4th, 1862. The Federal batteries respond in kind, and the two sides trade shots vigorously with one another. While the batteries lob shells at each other, the Confederate infantry gets into position to pick up the battle where they left off. Van Dorn's plan to finish off Rosecrans is to attack an echelon from the left to the right, opposite his plan from the day before, starting with Hebert's division on the left and ending with Lovell's division on the right. With this, Van Dorn expects a quick victory no matter how Rosecrans has aligned his troops. Facing this imminent assault is Rosecrans' battered yet reformed ranks on his last line of defense, the College Hill Line. Named after the Corona Female College, an education institution for local women. If the Confederates break through here, they'll have uninhibited access to Corinth. Luckily, since the Confederates did not take the town the day before, the Federals were given ample time during the night to further strengthen their defenses for this impending attack. Now, with the sun rising, they'll soon see how their enhanced fortifications stand up against the revitalized Confederates. At 7 a.m., the Confederates have maneuvered into position and are ready to attack, with all eyes looking left towards Hebert's division. However, as minutes tick by and the heat starts to rise, no sounds of battle are heard from Hebert's front. Van Dorn, who's anxiously waiting for Hebert to commence his attack, sends a staff officer to ascertain the reason for the delay. For some unknown reason, Hebert becomes too sick to command, but only notifies Price at 8 a.m. With Hebert incapacitated, Brigadier General Martin E. Greene, the Rankin Brigade commander, assumes Hebert's position and prepares for the attack. While Greene works out the kinks of his new command, both sides continue to suffer from the unrelenting bombardment of artillery. Finally, at 9 a.m., after 2 hours of standing in the heat, Greene is ready to lead Van Dorn's assault upon Corinth. Leading off Greene's assault is Colbert and his fresh brigade of trans-Mississippi troops. When they move up the hill towards the Federal earthworks, they start running into problems. Not only are they being hit by every gun the Federals can turn on them, but they also find a nasty surprise waiting for them. McLean, in command of Martin's brigade, is the first to hit the Federal line. Thinking he found the Federal flank, he and Colbert curve around and break the Federal spur, only to find the brigades of Holmes and Buford bent back, just waiting for their flank attack. Annoyed with finding this new line, the Confederates undauntedly continue their charge into the storm of lead and engage these stubborn Federals. Further west, in the middle of Greene's line, the brigades of Gates and Greene direct their attack towards Battery Powell in the center of Davies' line. Just like the day before, these Missourians have to attack uphill against entrenched Federals, paying dearly for every step they take. One of the Missourians wrote that it was a dreadful charge uphill. Once the rebels reach Battery Powell, they storm over the earthen walls and kill the occupants. When the remainder of Davies' brigade see that Battery Powell has fallen, they leave their positions and retreat to the town, opening a gap in the middle of Rosecrans' line. The road to Corinth is open. Despite running low on both manpower and ammunition, the victorious Confederates pursue their beaten foes straight into the streets of Corinth. They penetrate so deep into the town that they near the depot and the Tishomingo Hotel. Here, they get into a nasty short-range shootout among the buildings with the remnants of Davies' brigades. During the scrap, Colonel William H. Moore, who is leading the charge into the town, is fatally wounded. Just as they are on the brink of capturing Corinth, the Confederates reach the limit of their exertions. With their left wing stalled on the flank, no reinforcements incoming, and out of ammunition, Gates is forced to call a retreat, giving up their bloody hold on the town. Seeing the rebels pull back, the Federals charge forward to retake their entrenchments. All along the front, Federal units begin their counterattack, driving back the rebel attackers out of Corinth and north towards their staging ground. Leading this charge is the 5th Minnesota, who charged forward and herd the Confederates back at the point of the bayonets. Realizing that any hope of victory is gone, Greene's Confederates run pell-mell north across the very ground they paid dearly to take only an hour earlier. Meanwhile, on Greene's right, Maury is gearing up to make his attack upon the Federal earthworks. When Maury hears that Greene has commenced his attack, he unleashes his trans-Mississippians upon the defenders. These troops rapidly step off toward their objective, Battery Robinette, the centerpiece of the Union line. Just like Greene's men, the Texans meet an unrelenting storm of lead but continue, leaving many dead as they move forward. One Federal wrote that when our 60-pounder howitzers were let off, it seemed as if it killed whole companies. Pfeiffer, leading Maury's advance, directs his attack against Fuller and his Ohioans, while Moore angles right towards the battery. In front of Moore's brigade is Colonel William P. Rogers and his 2nd Texas, stout veterans of Shiloh. Realizing that only a concentrated drive against Battery Robinette will overcome his defenders, Rogers, who is still mounted on his charger, takes his 2nd's flag and leads his men forward. The Texans scramble over the embrasures and lock bayonets with Robinette's men. In the face of such odds, courage alone is not enough to overcome Battery Robinette's defenders. Seeing the Confederates falter, Fuller orders a countercharge all along his front to break their momentum. With bayonets in hand, the Federals charge toward Battery Robinette to seal the gap. On top of the battery, Rogers realizes that any hope of escape is gone and tries to surrender but is riddled with bullets in the chaos. Those who survive flee the best they can back in the direction they came, with no chance to reform their lines. Stanley, who's watching this counterattack unfold, declares that hill was cleared in an instant. Even with these turn of events, if Lovell attacks now, the Confederates still have a chance to claim victory. Yet, while Greene's and Maury's Confederates are on the cusp of victory, for an unknown reason, Lovell refuses to join in the attack with his desperately needed brigades. Thus, by 11 a.m., only 2 hours after their attacks have begun, the battle comes to an end with the rebel survivors fleeing the town. Rosecrans, despite frantically putting together a defensive line, is able to beat back Van Dorn's desperate attempt to take Corinth. Once the Confederates are out of sight, Rosecrans rides up to the defenders of Battery Robinette and declares, "I stand in the presence of brave men, and I take my hat off to you." The 2-day battle of Corinth devastates Van Dorn's small army. Due to his aggressive, mismanaged assaults against strong federal earthworks, roughly 22% of his men have become casualties, compared to only 12% for Rosecrans' army. The failure to take Corinth or push the Federals north simply caps off Van Dorn's disastrous attempt to turn the tide in Mississippi. Just like their first retreat back in May, the Confederates are once again shamefully retreating from Corinth. This time, the Federals pursue their beaten foe, hoping to destroy Van Dorn's battered army once and for all. On October 5th, the day after the battle, Rosecrans picks up his pursuit of the Confederates, but is unable to catch his wounded prey. On the other hand, General Ord, who is sent south by Grant to support Rosecrans, blocks Van Dorn's retreat and almost captures Van Dorn's entire army at the Battle of Hatchie's Bridge. Yet, during the fight, Van Dorn finds another path and escapes complete destruction. Staying one step ahead of the Federals, the Confederates safely reach Holly Springs. The Second Battle of Corinth is not only a disaster for the Confederate fortunes in Mississippi, but also for Van Dorn's military career. Just like Pea Ridge months earlier, Van Dorn has gambled his army in a desperate, ill-planned assault and lost. When President Davis receives the news of Van Dorn's second defeat, he strips him of his command and replaces him with Lieutenant General John C. Pemberton as the senior-ranking general in the state. Price, on the other hand, finally receives permission to return to Missouri, but he will be returning alone, without his fellow Missourians. Agitated for the second time with Rosecrans for dallying in the face of the retreating Confederates, Grant chastises his subordinate for his lackluster performance. This rebuke forms a rift between Grant and Rosecrans that will last a lifetime. Unable to work with Grant again, Rosecrans will soon be given independent command in Tennessee. With his hold over Corinth solidified and the Confederates now in the defensive, Grant is free to once again move against the rebels. With no force keeping him caged up in northern Mississippi, Grant starts eyeing the Confederate bastion on the Mississippi, the vital river town of Vicksburg. October 7th, 1862. As the Union Army of the Ohio beds down for the night a few miles west of the Confederate-occupied town of Perryville, four friends, Federal Generals Philip Sheridan, James Jackson, William Terrell, and Colonel George Webster, gather around a campfire to pass the night away in good fellowship. As the men banter, the topic of death and battle arises amid their conversation. Terrell, confident that he will survive, explains that the probability of his death remains small, even going as far to claim that the chances of all four of them dying in the same battle is next to impossible. Assured that the odds are in their favor, the four men bid their farewells and retire to their respective tents, confident that they will see each other again the following sunset. Thus, as both armies get what sleep they can in the face of the imminent battle, only time will tell if Terrell's prophetic declaration proves to be true. As dawn appears on October 1st, 1862, the reinforced army of the Ohio under Major General Don Carlos Buell marches out from its fortifications in Louisville, looking for a fight. After almost 2 months of chasing Bragg around Kentucky and Tennessee, the Federals are excited to have a battle on the horizon. Following Buell's plan, Brigadier General Joshua W. Sill marches his division straight towards Frankfort to divert Bragg's attention from his main thrust. This thrust constitutes the majority of Buell's army, the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Corps, which is aimed towards Bragg's reported position of Bardstown. Major General Alexander M. McCook's 1st Corps takes the northern route on the Taylorsville Pike. Taking the direct route on the Bardstown Pike is Major General Thomas L. Crittenden's 2nd Corps, who's accompanied by Buell's 2nd in command, Major General George H. Thomas. Finally, taking the southern route on the Shepherdsville Pike is Major General Charles C. Gilbert's 3rd Corps. Buell hopes that all 3 corps will converge upon Bragg at the same time and overwhelm the Confederates with numbers. On October 2nd, as Generals Braxton Bragg and Edmund Kirby Smith are planning their next phase of the campaign in Kentucky, a shocking report arrives. It appears that Buell has left the safety of Louisville and is heading straight toward the Confederates in Frankfort. Whatever plans Bragg had before are scrapped. Sensing battles at hand, Bragg hurriedly issues orders for Hardee and Polk to move their corps north to hit Buell's army in its flank as they attack Smith. However, Bragg has no idea that this force represents only a small portion of Buell's army. Unaware of Buell's true intentions, Bragg orders his forces of Versailles to be in a position to strike this expected assault upon Smith, imagining a battle similar to Lee's spectacular victory at Second Manassas. Just as it appears that a major battle is about to take place, Bragg decides to focus his attention on installing Richard Hawes as governor instead. As Bragg is mustering his forces for the upcoming battle near Frankfort, alarming reports come in from Polk. Despite all indications that the Federals are massing for an attack on Frankfort, Bragg receives vague reports from his subordinates of a large Union presence forming on the army's rear near Bardstown. Surprised by the strong columns appearing on his flanks, Polk ignores Bragg's orders to rally at Versailles and instead moves the army east towards Perryville. While these events are taking place, Bragg commences the inauguration of Richard Hawes as the Confederate governor of Kentucky. Despite a rainy October 4th, the inauguration proceeds. As Hawes and a few other notable Kentucky secessionists give their speeches, couriers arrive declaring the approach of Sill's Federals only a few miles away. With no men on hand, Bragg and the other Confederates flee the capital. The arrival of Sill's men all but confirms Bragg's suspicions that Buell's target is Frankfort. Once out of harm's way, Bragg orders all Confederate forces around Harrodsburg, where he hopes to merge his units into a coherent force and destroy Sill's Federals. Yet, when orders arrive, Polk and Hardee march towards Harrodsburg, but Smith does not. Worried about Sill's Federals marching upon Lexington, Smith only goes as far as the Kentucky River. With Smith refusing to comply and unwilling to pull rank, Bragg scraps his Harrodsburg plan and orders the Army of Mississippi to rally upon Smith. Meanwhile, Polk receives reports indicating that the force haunting his rear is not large, giving him a chance to defeat this isolated force. With this in mind, Polk orders Major General James P. Anderson and his division to join Hardee in Perryville to ascertain its strength and strike if possible. On the morning of October 7th, Hardee hurriedly prepares his lines to meet his pursuers. With only Major General Simon B. Buckner's division on hand, Hardee positions the brigades on the high ground to block the main roads leading into Perryville. Hardee intends to hold this line until Polk's reinforcements arrive to shore up his lines. In the middle of Hardee's line sits Liddell's brigade of veteran Arkansans, who have been pushed forward to Bottom Hill, overlooking the precious water of Doctor's Creek. Though Bottom Hill is a solid position for his men, Liddell is worried about Peters Hill just to his west, which easily dominates his position. Concerned that the Federals will use it against him, he dispatches the 7th Arkansas to garrison the heights. Meanwhile, just miles to the west, Buell's 3 Corps converging upon Perryville. On the left of the army is McCook's 1st Corps, advancing along the Mackville Road. Advancing in the center on the Springfield Pike is Gilbert's 3rd Corps. Finally, on the Lebanon Pike is Crittenden's 2nd Corps. As Gilbert's Corps marches eastward, they run into Confederate cavalry under Colonel Joseph Wheeler, who tries to stem their advance to no avail. By the evening of October 7th, Gilbert's 3rd Corps ends up the closest to Perryville and camps about 3 miles from the town. Buell, accompanying Gilbert, establishes his headquarters at a log house owned by John Dorsey, about 5 miles from Perryville. Expecting his entire army to arrive soon, Buell plans to attack the Confederates the next day before they retreat. He orders McCook and Crittenden to bring up their corps alongside Gilbert by 8 a.m. Once all three corps are lined up, they will attack. After almost a week of marching in the heat, the parched Federals are in desperate need of water. Despite the lack of water, Buell has Bragg's army in his grasp. All he has to do now is wait till tomorrow to attack, and the troublesome Confederates who have been rampaging throughout Kentucky will be crushed. As the clock strikes midnight on October 8, 1862, Federal scouts of Gilbert's 3rd Corps sent to locate water to fill their canteens. As they search, they spot the shallow pools from Doctor's Creek reflecting the moon's bright light. But as they near, they find Liddell's Arkansans atop Peters Hill protecting this liquid gold. Realizing it will take more than a few men to wrestle the water from them, Gilbert orders Brigadier General Philip Sheridan to choose one of his brigades for the job. Sheridan selects Colonel Dan McCook's Green Brigade of the Illinoisans for the job of taking Peters Hill. McCook, justifiably tense about making a nighttime assault with Green troops, advances quietly upon the unsuspecting Confederates. As the raw Illinoisans near the crest, the 7th Arkansas lights up the night as they fire into the incoming Federal ranks. Despite their best effort, Liddell's Arkansans cannot hold back McCook's men and retreat off Peters Hill. Not wanting to give up so easily, Liddell orders a counterattack, but he does not have the numbers to gain the edge over McCook and is forced to fall back. Due to the unexpected early morning fight, both McCook and Liddell are worried about facing superior forces and decide to hunker down to wait reinforcements. At 7 a.m., wanting to keep the momentum, Gilbert sends in Gay's cavalry brigade to clear the woods in front of McCook's position. Gay, who's not excited whatsoever about his assignment, charges the woods and is repulsed easily, losing many troopers in the process. Finding the rebels to be more trouble than first expected, Sheridan finally decides to commit Leiboldt's Pea Ridge veterans to the fight. Leiboldt's Germans tramp forward and charge Liddell's line, forcing back the Arkansans in a ferocious attack. Unable to withstand this attack without reinforcements, Polk decides to concede the fight and pull Liddell's brigade back to the main Confederate line. By 10 a.m., with Sheridan's Federals now in command of Peters Hill and the Confederates back in Perryville, neither side bothers to reignite the morning fight. During the lull, Polk rides the lines only to be shaken by what he finds: a large Federal force controlling the high ground just beyond the Chaplin River. Seeing this, Polk refuses to fight this unknown force that he believes outnumbers 18,000 men 3-1. Once again, contrary to Bragg's orders to attack, the bishop plans to fight a defensive battle and only attack if the conditions warrant an assault. Meanwhile, across the Chaplin River, Gilbert reins in the subordinates to await the expected arrival of McCook's and Crittenden's corps on his flanks. Soon, the vanguard arrives from McCook's 1st Corps and takes up a position near the Dixville Crossroads just north of Gilbert's position, 2 hours behind schedule. As McCook's men get into place, they see no sign of the promised rebels and believe they have missed the battle. Nonetheless, they use this time wisely to get some rest after their early morning march. Further south, Crittenden's corps is nowhere to be seen. Thomas, who's essentially in command, allows his men to get more rest, which puts the 2nd Corps even further behind Buell's timetable. As the men of Crittenden's 2nd Corps march within a few miles of Perryville, they run into more Confederate cavalry. Despite the stiff resistance put up by the rebel horsemen, the first elements of the 2nd Corps finally arrive around 11 a.m. When he arrives, Thomas dispatches news that his men have reached their designated position of Buell. The commanding general is quite unhappy about the delay that his 2 flank corps have caused. Thus, Buell concludes that he does not have enough time to attack on the 8th with the overwhelming force he has planned for and postpones the attack for the following morning. With no fight forthcoming and the rebels nowhere to be seen, the Federals slip into a state of laziness, getting what rest they can while the trailing brigades reach the front. Thanks to the strained command structure afflicting the entire Army of the Ohio, the initiative gained in the morning is now shifting to the Confederates as the sun climbs to its zenith. A weak chain of command is not only a problem for the Federal Army, as Confederates are suffering from their own breakdown of communication between Bragg and his subordinates on October 8th. Despite the heavy skirmish throughout the morning, neither Polk nor Hardee report to Bragg on the gravity of the situation developing west of Perryville. Because of this, Bragg still believes that the main Federal threat is aimed towards Frankfort due to an incessant barrage of urgent appeals coming from Smith. Anxious to gather his forces, Bragg needs Polk to dispose of this Federal force and hurry north to link up with Smith's men. Yet, as the sun rises higher and higher, no sounds of battle can be heard coming from Perryville. Concerned about the lack of sound from a raging battle and vague reports coming from his subordinates, Bragg decides to ride to Perryville and ascertain the situation himself. When the general finally arrives at the front, Bragg is furious at what he finds. Instead of finding an assault in progress, he finds his men resting leisurely about the town. Tired of delays, Bragg orders an immediate assault against the unknown Federal force in their front. However, as Bragg rides Polk's line, he's further disgusted to find that Polk has also failed to anchor his battle line on any strategic location. As a result, due to Polk's blatant disregard for his orders, no battle in progress, and a desire to link up with Smith, Bragg gets to work fixing the flaws made by his subordinates in anticipation of his upcoming assault. To fix the errors in his battle line, Bragg orders two complementary but time-consuming movements at 11 a.m. The first movement is for Hardee's two divisions of Anderson and Buckner to cross the dry bed of the Chaplin River and advance closer to the enemy. While this movement is in progress, Major General Franklin B. Cheatham's division of Polk's wing will pull out of line and march 2 miles north to fill the gap between Hardee's wing and Walker's Bend. Once Bragg has his men in place, a 30-minute bombardment will precede the infantry assault at 12:30. Once the bombardment is over, the rebel infantry will attack in echelon from right to left, starting with Cheatham's division, hoping to turn and destroy the Federal left flank. When Cheatham's attack is underway, Hardee will launch his men straight into the fray to finish off the Federal force for good. Despite fixing his line in anticipation for the assault, Bragg has no idea that Crittenden's 2nd Corps is near the field to the south. Thus, while the North Carolinian forms his lines, he's concentrating all his units to face the two Federal Corps currently present on his front, with no reserve in case a surprise enemy formation appears on his flanks. Once Bragg's orders arrive, the various units get moving. Hardee's two divisions lurch forward closer to the enemy. On Hardee's far left flank, Powell loses track of its adjacent brigades in the rolling hills, finding itself alone facing the Federal center. Cheatham's division makes good progress in their march north, falling into position in the critical gap pointed out by Bragg. During their march, they kick up great clouds of dust, a sign that many Federals take for retreating, who lower their guard even more. As the clock nears 12:30 p.m., the Confederates are readying themselves for a fight, while their Federal counterparts, who are all but convinced the rebels are retreating, relax in the hot October sun. Once the clock strikes 12:30 p.m., the Confederate batteries along the entire front open up on the unsuspecting Federals atop Bottom Hill. Startled by the barrage, these Federals dive to the ground to avoid the incoming shells. An eyewitness from Russo's division wrote that a continuous roar of cannons, intermingled with the screeching of shells and the whistling balls, created a pandemonium of discord and terror. Now aware that their foe has not retreated, the Federal artillerymen return fire. Thanks to their superior guns, the Federals soon obtain the upper hand and devastate the outmatched Confederate batteries. As the bombardment dies down, McCook expects an infantry assault to soon follow the barrage. With this in mind, he shakes out his corps into a battle line. As he watches his men move into position, he realizes that his left flank is left exposed. To To counteract this, he orders Terrell's Green Brigade of Western troops onto the open knob, directly where Bragg expects to turn the Federal left flank. Seeing these Federal columns move toward the hill, Polk decides once again to delay the attack, much to Bragg's consternation. After waiting for another hour and with no more hidden columns threatening his advance, Polk finally unleashes his wing upon the Federal left flank at 2 p.m. Leading off Cheatham's attack is Donelson's Brigade of Tennessee Veterans. Once the orders arrive, they let loose a rebel yell and march forward. Facing the Tennesseans is a deceptive terrain of hills, valleys, and tree lines that fill the void between the two armies. However, as the Confederates surge forward, Bragg's plan to flank the Federals unravels as Donelson's men climb the last ridge before reaching the enemy. Instead of arriving on the Federal flank, Donelson's men find themselves attacking the front of Jackson's division. Prepared for such an attack, Terrell's men, along with supporting artillery, shred the onrushing rebels. Despite the hail of lead being shot into their lines, Donelson's men push on, but the Federals hold stoutly to their hill. Joseph Gleason, a Hoosier in Terrell's ranks, wrote that, "Our bullets found them in their hiding places and strewed the ground with their mutilated carcasses." Unable to break Terrell's raw recruits, Donelson's men retreat after suffering immense casualties. To deal with this unexpected force, Cheatham continues his echelon attack, but also sends Maney's Tennesseans on a flank attack to the right. Surprising the Federals on the left flank, Maney's men fire destructive volleys upon the hapless Bluecoats. During one of the volleys, Jackson is instantly killed by a bullet to the chest. Seeing the Federals crumble, Maney's men charge up the hill along with Stuart's fresh brigade of Tennesseans. Unable to withstand this renewed advance, Terrell's men give up the open knob at 3:30 p.m. Meanwhile, as the fighting rages on the Army's left flank, Buell casually hears faint sounds of cannon fire as he nurses a headache at his headquarters. This lack of sound is due to an acoustic shadow, a similar atmospheric condition that affected Confederate General Joseph E. Johnston at the Battle of Seven Pines. With only a faint sound coming from the front, Buell disregards the firing as another artillery duel like before. Annoyed, the commanding general orders Gilbert to stop the firing. In turn, Gilbert orders Sheridan, who he believes to be the culprit, to hold his fire, much to the latter's confusion. While Buell is ignorant of the fighting, Bragg is watching in unashamed pride as Cheatham's division opens the assault against the Federal left flank. However, as Bragg commits his tiny force against only a portion of the enemy, he's painfully unaware of the menacing threat bearing down upon his left flank. His cavalry has done a poor job at either informing him of this threat or checking its advance on the Lebanon Pike. Thus, as Bragg continues his assaults, he remains blissfully ignorant of Thomas's arriving corps. Back at the front, even though Cheatham's brigades have broken Terrell's hold on the open knob, communication within the Confederate ranks start to unravel. Not waiting for their turn, Jones' brigade of poorly equipped Mississippians begin their attack against the right flank of Russo's division, stationed near Squire Bottom's house. Holding the superior position, Harris's Ohioans easily repulse Jones' outgunned rebels. Watching Jones' brigade open the attack, Buckner believes it is his time to attack as well and sends in his two brigades against Lytle's brigade of Ohio and Indiana troops. Johnson's brigade of Tennesseans pitch into the fray, but due to a combination of friendly fire and confusion, their assault grinds to a halt. Seeing Johnson's men stall in their attack, Buckner rushes in Adams' brigade of Louisiana veterans to support them. As the Louisianans join the fight, Lytle finds his brigade pinned between two converging rebel attacks, while Harris faces a new threat as Brown's fresh brigade of Floridians apply their weight to the contest. Yet, after an hour of incessant firing, both sides run out of ammunition. Unwilling to let go of their hard-earned ground, both sides send for help. It is now a race to see who receives support first for the fight over Squire Bottom's house. Seeking support, Johnson calls on Cleburne's veteran Arkansas and Tennessee Brigade to help break the stalemate for the house. Once Cleburne receives a request, he crosses Doctors Creek and climbs up the hill. This new threat is more than what Lytle's battered brigade can handle and collapses. During his retreat, Lytle is wounded in the head trying to rally his men, who abandon him amid the confusion. Harris, on the other hand, refuses to give up his position. Annoyed with Harris's stubborn determination, Buckner dispatches his last fresh brigade, Wood's massive brigade of Alabama and Mississippi veterans, to fill the gap between Brown and Stewart. Unable to withstand this new threat, Harris decides he has had enough and pulls his men out before they're destroyed. By 4:30 p.m., with Jackson's division in chaos and Russo's division in full-blown retreat, McCook is witnessing the very destruction of his corps. Panicking, McCook sends for help from Gilbert's nearby 3rd Corps, but to his astonishment, nobody is willing to help. Sheridan, who is the nearest division to McCook's 1st Corps, nervously waits to be attacked himself. However, despite the lack of support from the 3rd Corps, for some unknown reason, McCook fails to notify Buell of the severity of the situation. Therefore, Buell continues to be in the dark about the battle raging on his left. At the same time, Crittenden's 2nd Corps is in a position to catch Bragg by surprise, but with no orders from Buell, the men of 2nd Corps sit idly by as their comrades in McCook's 1st Corps fight for their very existence. Even though Terrell's raw recruits have finally broken in the face of unrelenting odds, the Confederates now have to contend with Starkweather's fresh brigade of Wisconsinites. Though badly mauled in their first fight, the Confederates continue their push with reinforced vigor. Leading this new threat is Brigadier General Alexander P. Stewart, known as Old Straight by his men, while the remainder of Cheatham's division trails behind. Once the Confederates are in point-blank range, Starkweather's men unleash a devastating volley into their ranks, momentarily blunting their advance. Despite the destructive volley, the Confederates close ranks and charge the Federal defenders. A desperate melee breaks out in the cornfield where both sides fiercely hack away at each other. Unable to resist Confederate onslaught, the green men of Starkweather's brigade break from the strain of combat and flee the field. As chaos swirls around the Federal left flank, Terrell realizes that nobody has assumed command of Jackson's division. But just as he puts his division cap on, a shell fragment strikes him in the chest, killing him instantly. When Colonel Webster hears that Terrell has been killed, he assumes command of Jackson's division and rallies the broken remnants behind a stone wall near the Widow Gibson house. Once the Confederates catch their breath, Manning and Stewart throw their thin ranks against this new defensive position. The imposing natural strength proves too much for the rebels to handle and are beaten back with severe casualties. Manning and Stewart tried 2 more times to take the position, but realized they have no chance of taking the wall. Firmly checked by the Federals, Manning and Stewart pull back their decimated ranks, giving up the possibility of reaching the Dixville Crossroads for good. Manning and Stewart's brigades pay dearly for their progress, but it proves to be in vain as they are unable to reach the important crossroads. The Federals suffered just as much as the Confederates, with many of Jackson's brigades losing almost 50% of their men. Though Jackson's men finally stop the unrelenting push by the rebels, fighting to the south kicks up again, with Buckner's men resuming their assault against Russo's fleeing division as the sun starts to dip below the horizon. Following in the wake of the retreating Federals, Cleburne leads a renewed advance against McCook's right flank. Finding Lytle's disorganized brigade down the road, the Confederates move up and decimate their ranks with accurate rifle fire. James Shanklin, a member of the 42nd Indiana, wrote that, "The scream, the wild, terrible, demon yells of the bombs that whizzed past us, and the snake-like hissing of the bullets made that march decidedly the most interesting trip I ever took." Unable to withstand this pressure, the remnants of Lytle's brigade fall back again. With Lytle's command gone, Cleburne stands within 100 yards of the Dixville Crossroads. Finding a gap on his right, McCook orders Webster to move his mainly Ohio brigade to fill the void opened up by Harris. Though presenting a firm blue wall, these green men stand no chance against Adams' shallow veterans. Once Confederates come into range, they mow down Webster's men. Among those who fall is Colonel Webster himself, who is mortally wounded in the contest. With the death of Webster, 3 out of 4 men who Terrell predicted not to die in the battle are dead. Only Sheridan, who stands in Gilbert's 3rd Corps, remains alive. With the sun sinking fast, and the Confederate battle lines rolling forward, Only time will tell if Sheridan makes it out of Perryville alive. Meanwhile, on Webster's right, Russo forms an impromptu line by the Russell House to face Cleburne's thin but victorious regiments. After hours of marching up and down hills and breaking line after line, Cleburne's men are at the end of the rope. When they arrive within range of Russo's line, they are hit with a point-blank volley and retreat. Realizing that his men cannot go any further, he pulls his men back to Squire Bottom's house. Though the Confederates have been somewhat victorious so far, they are running out of time. If they cannot crack McCook's battered First Corps and reach the Dixville crossroads before dark, they will lose their chance of destroying an entire Federal Corps. Though they have gained a momentary respite after beating back Cleburne, many of McCook's First Corps desperately want to see darkness, with Russo going as far as exclaiming, "Will that sun never go down?" Further to the south, the threat that Sheridan has been waiting for all day finally materializes as Powell's lone brigade marches forward to silence one of his batteries. When Sheridan spots these rebels, he expects these men to be the vanguard of a new major attack, but due to the rolling terrain, he has no idea it is only a single brigade. Thus, Sheridan refuses to render McCook any support. As Powell's men near, they raise a rebel yell and charge forward, but as they get within range of Sheridan's division, they realize their mistake. Just like Sheridan, Powell did not realize the battery is supported by an entire division. Nevertheless, Powell's Confederates put up a good fight, but ultimately retreat in the face of overwhelming odds. During this little scrap, Sheridan calls on Mitchell to support his mentally shaky position. Keeping to his word, Mitchell dispatches Carlin's brigade of Westerners to chase after Powell's retreating men. The Federals chase Powell so far they reach the outskirts of Perryville. Seeing Carlin's progress, Mitchell realizes that he has a chance to seize the town and cut off Bragg's line of retreat. With Crittenden's 2nd Corps nearby and ready to support, Mitchell stands poised to take Perryville from the distracted Confederates. However, there's one thing Mitchell did not take into account: his Corps commander, Major General Charles C. Gilbert. The darkness that engulfed the Federal headquarters at Perryville is finally lifted when Sheridan defeats Powell's lone attack. The sounds of battle finally wake Buell and Gilbert from their ignorance. Once these sounds are heard, Buell finally orders Gilbert to ride to the front to see what is going on. When Gilbert joins Sheridan, he is informed of McCook's impending collapse. Shocked by the severity of the situation, Gilbert orders 2 brigades to support McCook in his life-or-death struggle for the crossroads. The general takes these brigades from Mitchell's division and orders the aggressive general back in line with Sheridan, much to his disgust. Gilbert sends out these orders just in time, as Polk is making one last desperate assault for the Dixville crossroads in the fading twilight. As the Federals are shuffling their formations around to solidify McCook's front, the Confederates are gearing up to finally break through and capture the vital crossroads. With most Confederate brigades out of action, only a few are able to continue the fight. Adams' Louisianans, among others, push on in hopes of breaking through McCook's shaky line. Yet, as they near the blue line, not only are they hit in the front but also receive punishing fire on their flank from Sheridan's batteries atop Peters Hill. Shocked, Adam abruptly cancels his attack and pulls back. With Adams' brigade out of the fight, Wood is left alone to contend with McCook's line. Advancing forward, these men expect to find the Federals on their last legs. Instead, they find Gooding's fresh brigade of Illinoisans from 3rd Corps arriving to blunt their attack. In the darkening sky, Gooding's men charge Wood's tired men. Not expecting to face fresh troops, the rebels run for the rear in complete confusion. With the desperation coming to a head, Hardee orders for the very brigade who started the battle, Liddell's Arkansas veterans. When dictating orders to Liddell, Hardee orders his brigadier to go where the fire is the hottest, which proves to be difficult in the gloom. After their fight for Peters Hill that morning, Liddell's men have mainly been spectators for the afternoon fight. But now, with the light fading, it is once again their turn to rejoin the contest. As the Arkansans advance, visibility fades in the encroaching darkness. Due to the darkness, Liddell's Arkansans unknowingly advance within 30 yards of Gooding's brigade. Unsure what stands in front of his line, Liddell holds his fire. At this moment, Polk rides up and decides to scout for Liddell. As Polk rides forward, he unexpectedly finds himself in the middle of Gooding's Federal line. Thinking quickly, Polk takes command of the situation and orders the 22nd Indiana to hold their fire. Despite receiving orders from an unknown officer, the Hoosiers ultimately obey. Once it is clear, Polk gallops back to Liddell's line and quickly orders the Arkansans to fire straight ahead, which devastates a confused 22nd Indiana and wounds Gooding in the process. Shocked at the sudden blast, the 22nd runs for the rear, leaving piles of dead men in their wake. Only until after the battle does the Hoosiers realize the full extent of their losses. Once counted, the 22nd Indiana lost 195 men, 65.3% of its strength in a matter of minutes. With the breakdown of the 22nd Indiana and Gooding's wounding, the rest of the brigade falls back in the face of Liddell's fire. When Liddell advances, he believes he has captured the field for the Confederates and won the battle. Yet, just as they move forward, cheering can be heard across the intersection announcing the arrival of Steedman's fresh Federal brigade, who is sent to fill the gap left by Gooding's demoralized men. Determined to finish the job once and for all, Liddell prepares his men to face off against these fresh troops. However, witnessing firsthand the chaotic confrontation with Gooding's men, Polk has had enough for today. With no light left and visibility down to mere feet, Polk orders Liddell to pull back, giving up their chance to take the Dixville crossroads. Thus, as the moon reaches its apex over the battlefield on October 8, 1862, the Battle of Perryville comes to a close. Once the firing subsides, the gruesome harvest reaped from the battle becomes visible under the bright moonlight. Thousands of men, wounded and dead, lay strewn about the field, clustered mainly around the former Federal left flank atop the open knob, where Terrell held his position that afternoon. As the final guns are fired, the cacophony of explosions that grip the area around Perryville is replaced by the cries and screams of the wounded, who called desperately for help to end their suffering. In total, after the day-long battle on the hills west of Perryville, the Federals suffered 7% casualties of the 55,000 men present on the field, though only around 22,000 men were ever engaged. While the Confederates, who only had 18,000 men present, a little over half of Bragg's army, suffered 21% casualties. With a combined total of 7,600 casualties, Perryville will be the largest battle that has ever fought in Kentucky in the war. 20 years later, Private Sam Watkins of the 1st Tennessee wrote that, "I cannot tell the one half, or even remember at this late date, the scenes of blood and suffering that I witnessed on the battlefield at Perryville." Despite the immense suffering, both sides remain on the field, which concerns Bragg greatly. Even though his army has driven the enemy back by almost a mile and dealt severe destruction upon its ranks, the Federals show no sign of retreating. If his men have won a great victory, why do the Federals remain on the field? Only as time passes does the situation become clear for the general. Bragg receives dispatches from his cavalry that indicate that he is in fact facing the entirety of Buell's army, not just a mere isolated corps as before. Not only that, a fresh Federal corps he never saw now threatens his left flank and line of retreat. Though his force has won a tactical victory, there are too battered to remain in Perryville to take on the rest of Buell's army the next day. When Bragg learns the full extent of the situation facing his exhausted army, he decides that his best course of action is to retreat and link up with Smith at Lexington. With all of his subordinates in concurrence, the Army of Mississippi leaves Perryville at first light on October 9th. With the Federals just across the field, Bragg worries about the safety of his army. Luckily, Buell is content to remain on the field and let the Confederates leave. After the rebels pull out of Perryville, they briefly link up with Smith at Harrodsburg on October 10th. Yet, as the lumbering army of the Ohio finally gets moving, Bragg worries about being caught in a pincer and pulls back further east. Though both sides have reached parity in numbers, Buell refuses to give Bragg another chance at catching him off guard. To further exacerbate the Confederate prospects in Kentucky, bad news arrives from Corinth about Van Dorn's stinging defeat at the hands of Rosecrans. Realizing that no support is coming from Mississippi, Bragg begins to seriously consider abandoning the Bluegrass State altogether. With no prospect of battle, souring weather, and dwindling supplies, the Army of Mississippi cannot sustain itself in enemy territory for much longer. The death-knell Confederate hopes in Kentucky ultimately comes from the Kentuckians themselves. After a few weeks of traveling through Kentucky, Bragg found the locals to be extremely aloof and lacking any real enthusiasm to free their state from the clutches of federal control. Therefore, with all these details in consideration, Bragg makes the ultimate decision and ends his invasion of Kentucky on October 12th. For the next week, the gloomy Confederates trudged back to Knoxville, allowing the Federals to reassert control over the Bluegrass State. For the rest of the war, the Confederates will never seriously threaten federal control over Kentucky again. Compared to their joyous march north a month prior, the Confederates, both high and low, returned to Tennessee enraged with their commander. So much so that a coalition of anti-Bragg officers signed a petition for President Davis to have Bragg removed from command and be replaced by General Joseph E. Johnston. However, after the president meets with Bragg, he decides to keep Bragg in his position after he declares his intentions to liberate Middle Tennessee. With his position secure for the time being, Bragg orders his army to Chattanooga to begin preparations for a move against Nashville. This decision enrages the anti-Bragg coalition to the point that they pledge to openly question every order Bragg issues for the rest of their service. Buell, just like Bragg, faces his own political firestorm after the Confederate invasion of Kentucky, especially due to his extremely poor performance at the Battle of Perryville. Though his army stymied the Confederate advance at Perryville, the Federals can only claim a strategic victory as they eventually force Bragg to retreat, securing their hold over the Bluegrass State. Buell, done trying to chase down the fleeing Confederates, pivots his army back to Nashville as he suspects that will be Bragg's next objective. Seeing his best chance to finally liberate pro-Union East Tennessee, Lincoln orders Buell to march upon Knoxville instead. Not wanting to contend with the rugged mountains of East Tennessee, Buell outright refuses to comply with the order. When the president receives Buell's refusal, he strips him of his command and gives it to the victor of Iuka and 2nd Corinth, Major General William S. Rosecrans. Yet, just as Lincoln thought he finally found an officer who would listen to orders, Rosecrans adopts Buell's Nashville strategy and orders the army to rout the state capital to confront Bragg, who's moving northwest from Chattanooga, just as Buell expected. Months after the two armies face off at the small town of Perryville, Middle Kentucky, both sides are once again on the move as Rosecrans marches south from Nashville and Bragg marches north from Chattanooga. As the two armies march forward, they're bound to collide in December's cold, damp weather, this time along Stones River near Murfreesboro, Tennessee.